Hello and welcome to the Sound Financial Group podcast. My name is Paul Adams. I'm your host today, solo. Corey is not here. I am alone because Corey is out on family vacation, but I was out on family vacation last week. I missed talking to all of you, and I have a fun episode for us today. Today, we're going to talk about Dave Ramsey, and we're going to blow up how some of his principles has significantly damaged a great deal of his listenership. Now, I have the utmost respect for Dave Ramsey, what he's created. He has created a financial empire by giving people financial advice as a non-licensed professional. If you listen to his show, you'll notice at the beginning and the end of every show, much like this has in our disclosures, like be sure to check with a tax or legal advisor before implementing any of this. You should do that with me. You should definitely do that with Dave. Because in this case, I'm licensed, I'm a fiduciary, so are Corey and Jeff, and our advisors can offer you that advice, and we're liable if it's wrong. The difference between us and Dave Ramsey is not liable if he's wrong because it's at the beginning and end of every show, and if you were to sue him, the judge would simply look and go, that is an entertainer, that is not an advisor. So we're going to be taking one specific look at some of Dave's advice. Now, much of Dave's advice is wonderful. And where I think Dave's advice works best is for people that are broke. Let me explain. If you're having a hard time paying your bills, if you're drowning in credit card debt, if you've yet to take the step of perhaps becoming a tither to your church, etc., some of his principles will work great to get you on that basic track. But some of those same principles, when carried into higher income households or more consequential situations, like the ownership of a business, begin to falter out. And where it comes from is zealotry. Now, what I mean by zealotry is anytime we're listening to someone and they say always this or always that and never this thing, when you hear that, well, at least what it does for me is it has me almost instantly say, this person's a zealot. Like they're like, absolutely Chevy, no matter what. It's like, well, shoot, I can't take your advice on what I should get for a next car because no matter what, I already know you're going to recommend Chevy. You're not going to look at me or my situation and perhaps recommend a Toyota or a Ford. Similar here. He is so vested inside of his principles that he is going to follow that no matter what evidence is presented to him. You guys may have remembered years ago, we did an episode on his 12% return in a good growth mutual fund and how unfounded that is and how well he's defended it over the years. Maybe we'll do another episode on that, little refresh. But we're going to get into specifically his advice around the Paycheck Protection Program loan that was forgivable if you used the loan for the purposes it was meant for, like paying overhead and paying employees. Totally forgivable in the terms of the contract. Now that's key. I want you guys to focus on that, is that in the contract that we had with the bank, if you had a PPP loan, it said this is forgivable. Now, if you're not a business owner, I would encourage you to tune in and maybe even be more easy to listen to because you didn't take a PPP loan. You may not know that much about it, but you'll get a real sense of how some of this advice that we get can be made or given to us because that's the advice this advisor gives, in this case, Dave Ramsey. But it may or may not be the best advice for your situation, and any advice you get anywhere should be tested with a competent advisor or coach to be able to see if it's the right move for you. Okay, so with that, we're going to jump in to our first video where a woman calls in to the show and simply asks, what should I do with this PPP loan? We're starting it just a little bit in because he had a tech issue in getting her into the call, but we're going to watch together, and I may pause periodically through this to just offer a little more context to what Dave is talking about.
Linda, there you are. How's it going out there?
It's going well. Thank you.
How can we help today?
Mr. Ramsey, I'm so blessed to be able to talk to you. I'm the owner of a small business. I've been in business for over 20 years. I don't have any debt. I never took out a loan on the business. And, we've been profitable. And I have 3 employees. Now, I was advised by my landlord that I rent the business from, the space from, and by my financial planner to try, to apply for this paycheck protection plan. And right before the coronavirus.
I'm going to pause there for just a moment. I want you guys to notice she's mentioning 2 people that have a vested interest in her business staying successful and her hopefully building wealth over time. Certainly her landlord cares that she is able to pay her rent, and definitely her financial advisor wants her to have the greatest amount of success in her life going forward. So the 2 people she's gotten the advice from are people that have vested interests, her landlord and her financial advisor, in her continuing her financial success that she's had in this business for the last 20 years. Okay, let's jump back in.
And we got a lot of business in. So it would be okay. I could get through this without taking out the loan, but I was told that it was free money. And so what do you advise?
Okay, I want to pause there for a moment because of something that she said is I could get through this without the loan. Something I commend that Dave Ramsey does here is he actually digs in a little bit. Like, what do you mean? How long is that? Watch.
Do I take out the loan or do I lay off 2 of the people that work for me?
I thought you said you could make it through it.
I can make it through it, but only if I'm by myself because I'm the 3rd person.
What kind of business is it?
It's a service industry, specialized.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so how long before you run out of money if you don't take the loan?
I would say 3 months.
So why can you not make it 3 months?
I can make it 3 months.
Without laying anybody off?
No, I would.
That's what I meant. If you
I think she would have to lay them off.
If you don't lay someone off, how long can you make it?
If I don't, I would say a month and a half.
Okay. All right. So why do you have to make the decision now to lay someone off or take the loan?
Well, because I submitted the loans to 4 different banks.
No, I mean, if you didn't take the loan.
Yeah.
Okay. And you went a month and a half out, assuming the loans are still available, they may not be, but you could take it then, right?
Now, he's making a point. He's like, you don't have to make a permanent decision here. You could take it later, but at least he discloses if it's still available. Now, think about for a small business owner, 2 employees on payroll, some kind of service business, let's say that's $160,000 that could be on her balance sheet that she could take out of an abundance of caution. And as long as she used it for the prescribed purposes, payroll and certain expenses like overhead, then it's forgiven contractually. Okay, here we go.
Well, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Because after a month and a half, I think you could be turned around. What service do you provide?
Now, this is early in the pandemic. He said a month and a half to turn it around. So I'll forgive that. Certainly, I don't want to condemn him for that part. But just saying, if it's still around, then you could do it. Well, is the principle, Dave, we, no matter what, don't take on debt, or after you've exercised all these other options, which is really what you see is he says, as you do all these other things, he's going to talk about the Ramsey enterprise here in a moment. And he says, as long as you do all these other things first, that before you borrow money. And the problem is if the principle you're following, specifically in this case, and I say this as a fellow person that gives testimony to faith in Jesus Christ, he's following the Bible of the borrower is the slave to the lender, that you shouldn't pursue debt, etc. But it's okay if to do debt or sin, from his view, it's okay to sin as long as we did all these other things first. Okay, that's something I can't theologically agree with. It's either we're being good stewards with the capital that we've been given up to and including the capital inside of our companies, or we're not being a good steward. And I think that can be measured with math as opposed to be measured in the amount of condescension that you can muster to a caller into your show?
Well, it's an art service.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, the thing is, what we told our folks here is, are you and your husband in good shape financially where you don't have to take an income from the business for a while?
I'd say we're okay for a few months.
Yeah, like if you didn't take an income for 1 month, you could keep your people?
Yes.
Yeah. I would look at you not taking an income before I laid people off, and I would look at laying people off before I took out a loan.
So that's my point, is that here he's talking about you go ahead and work without pay, which, by the way, as a business owner, I think one of the most important things, like maybe you don't pay yourself bonuses, etc., but you're in working that business, you should have the discipline that your business should be able to afford somebody who runs it. So if you overpay yourself, you're running your business, you pay yourself $800,000, but if you really hired somebody else, you'd only pay like $200,000, maybe cut your pay back to something more reasonable when things are tight. But you don't have a business if you can't afford to pay your employees and pay someone to run it. You are digging it out of cash. That may be a good reason. You got to pare down real quickly if you can't even pay your own income, as opposed to we're going to do this first and then pare back employees. There is a situation as the boss. Perhaps business being slow means we don't need those same employees, or we could train them up when we need them again. Many of person have dug themselves into a tremendously deep financial hole following this advice Dave Ramsey just gave. And here's the problem. Dave Ramsey will say, well, this works, but the real problem is people who have done this and then their businesses fail, they end up deeply embarrassed and ashamed. And if that happens, they're not going to be talking to you at the brunch on Saturday, at church on Sunday, or the golf course on Wednesday about how their business really failed and the order of operations that they missed in the way they handled their capital. It'll be the economy, or I decided I'd rather work for somebody else. You don't get that real straight poop. So there's almost a survivorship bias in the way that we observe the reality of what Dave is saying. Okay, let's jump back in.
The problem with the PPP loan is it is a loan. Mm-hmm. It has a term with an interest rate. It is not a grant.
Agreed. PPP was a loan, but it was a loan with a contract that said if certain conditions were met, it would be forgiven. Okay? Again, say that again. If certain conditions were met, then the loan was forgiven. Not a grant. It is a loan. But what he's leaving out is that the loan has contractual provisions around forgiveness.
It has provisions, and you can pull the law up and read it. It's available on the internet. It has provisions for forgiveness of the loan, and that's why your advisors are acting like it's free money. If you meet those provisions
they're acting like it's free money because they understand contracts, and they're operating based upon the contract, not based upon, I've told people for many years to not take on any debt, so I can't possibly change my mind now. See, that's the problem with a zealot. They can't adapt.
Exactly. And if they don't change the game in the middle of it, and you're dealing with the SBA and the federal government, and frankly, I don't trust their competence, and I don't trust Congress to not change the game.
So this would be my question.
So I am never going to borrow money.
So here'd be my question for Mr. Ramsey. I don't trust them. Okay. So then everybody else you do business with, every one of your vendors, the contractors that built your studio, the producers that are behind the scenes, any contracts he has on any real estate stuff, he does that on a handshake because he only does business with people he trusts? Or does he have contracts in place and the contracts dictate the relationship, and many people he and the Ramsey organization have a relationship with, he may not even know well enough to know whether or not he should trust them. So what he does is rely on contracts in that instance, but for some reason, not in this relationship to the PPP loan.
I can tell you at Ramsey, the first thing that will happen is our leadership team will go without pay. The second thing will happen is that another layer of our leaders would volunteer likely to go without pay. The third thing that would...
Incidentally, I wonder how that felt to his other leaders. They would like to go without pay so that I can't borrow money at 3.75% that would be fully forgivable based upon the contract. Just think about that for a moment. What does that communicate to your employees? That the fellow business right down the road, and I know I get a little impassioned about this, and I don't mean this as like a disparagement of Dave Ramsey, but I do mean it as an imploring to always filter, no matter how much authority somebody has, filter what they're saying against reasonableness. Think through the consequences of whatever decision they're recommending that you make. Now, this is 3+ years ago, so the damage has been done. But imagine your employee, one of your leaders, who's now having to get partially furloughed. And then there's a business next door, and not only are they not getting furloughed, but because they're coming through the pandemic okay, they are in the position that they're getting bonuses. Why are they getting bonuses? Well, the business owner was smart and prudent and read the contract and got a PPP loan, and lo and behold, they managed to also navigate the pandemic in a way that they had growth, that they had profitability, etc., and the PPP loan was still forgiven. Every one of those people where the employee had to be furloughed, and it was all because, gosh darn it, I'm not going to take, as Dave called it, free money from the government, and as a result, left their employees, maybe their top leaders, feeling like, wow, you're willing to totally betray me and my family and make me pay part of this, even though I have no equity in the company, because you didn't want to have a loan for a period of time that was to be forgiven. Let's put it in perspective. If the SBA in mass said we're not forgiving these loans, people would be carrying like pitchforks to Congress. Like it would be bananas. And yet, we know that they got forgiven. So I'm going to jump out of this video and I'm going to show you another. Here's the funny thing. So I want you to notice this clip. This is 3 years ago. And one particular thing, and whenever somebody is a zealot, you can usually pick it up from this kind of language. So I'm going to start about 2.5 minutes into this one. And here we go. All right. So let's get back to the clip here. We're about 2.5 minutes in, and we're going to hear Dave Ramsey make certain statements. And when people make statements like this, you just know you've got a zealot on your hand. It just means you need to double check what they said. It doesn't mean what they're saying is not accurate. Just got to double check it because, you know, they're not thinking about it anymore. They made their decision years ago and they're sticking with it. Here we go.
Admired about you is you have figured out that there are principles. When Proverbs 22:7 says the rich rules over the poor, the borrower is slave to the lender. When you take that as a principle, even when you can technically justify the specific context of a situation, logically, you might can justify taking the PPP. You can.
Now, by the way, I'm leaving this in because for some who are enormous Dave Ramsey fans, this is one of the best arguments for him doing what he does because he's sticking to his principles. But as I said earlier, so if Dave, what you were looking to do was follow principles, and to you, taking out debt is a sin you're working to avoid, why is that sin okay to engage in after I've furloughed my top executives, after I stopped taking in income, and after I've fired a bunch of employees? Why is that now the moral thing to do? It's moral that I put these people out on the street because I didn't want to sign a contract that fully said that as long as I deployed the money within my control to the uses they said to use it for, and I'm going to be no worse economic condition than I was going to be if I had no money. Put that together, guys. Meaning, if I had $300,000 worth of payroll and I got $300,000 of PPP, I spent it on those $300,000 worth of people. Now I get it forgiven. I could have fired everybody, destroyed my business, had a bunch of employees that never want to work for me again, all because I didn't want to take a loan. Where's the morality? Okay. Sorry, that was me getting a little... Watching these with you guys really has me tuned up. So I wanted to leave that in about the principles. Now let's pick up as Dave speaks to it.
You can go down the list and say, but it's logical that, and it's logical, and I can rationalize this if I want to ignore the...
Which, he says, you rationalize it if I ignore the principle. All they're doing is putting extra steps in front of the rationalization.
Principle. But there's some things that are just worth standing on your conviction on a timeless principle.
Again, a timeless principle that if you've already stopped taking income and you've already stopped paying your leaders and you've already fired some employees, then go get the loan.
It's based on wisdom.
Well, let me ask you both this. Isn't this a trade-off of short-term pain because you don't want to have to let anybody go? No leader wants to do that. That's awful. You're trading short-term pain to then have long-term pain because you're going to be stuck with this loan over the long haul. And Dave...
Now, that right there, this is where I'm not going to put it like they're lying. Because they thought this is true. They had no basis to think this is true because the contract is very clear in the loan document. But they think it's true. They're going to say it like this. And whether it's just misinformation, a false belief, zealotry, it doesn't matter. It puts you in the position that somebody may as well have lied to you because you have the consequence of not having the hundreds of thousands of dollars of PPP money because you listened to the Dave Ramsey who doesn't know anything about your situation, your employees, where your business is going, your growth plan. No. Just the only thing that they have is this principle that they're perfectly willing to compromise as long as they took certain steps first.
Daniel, aren't we going to see a lot of small businesses that were otherwise healthy until cash flow stopped, strap themselves with something they got? So I just think that's what people aren't thinking. They're not thinking of the long-term trade-off. Isn't that the real problem?
Well,
which incidentally, in some ways, these guys are like freely collapsing the EIDL loan, economic entry and disaster loan that was offered with PPP because you won't be stuck with the loan if you used it to do the thing the loan is meant to do. It was 100% forgiven. We're going to talk about those stats before we're done here today.
They're not thinking about the fact they're increasing their risk. They're increasing they are now about to be slave to the SBA or the bank and all these things that Dave's talking about. And so it's not free money.
Now here is your total tip to hearing a zealot is what's going to come out of Dave's mouth next.
It's not no strings attached.
Here's the thing. How many people are out there saying right now, and I haven't rubbed anybody's nose in this publicly anywhere.
We're about to rub it in his.
Okay. I will admit to I have had the thought, but I have not done it. I have not done it. How many people are out there saying, gosh, I wish I had listened to that stupid Ramsey guy that I thought was crazy, and I wish right now I was out of debt and I had an emergency fund in place. And now we're sitting here discussing going into debt in the middle of a time when you're just supposed to have learned that this crap doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, my God. You have the lesson sitting right in front of you, and then you look to your right and go, I'm going to borrow money. You know, it's so freaking illogical. It violates two things. One is it tells you that, let me just tell you, there's one time that debt works, and that's if everything works.
False. Just false. Anybody listening to this who has a business and has ever borrowed money, it doesn't require everything works. It requires you made a prudent decision so when some things don't work, which is always the case, you're still fine. But debt does not completely fail if everything doesn't go exactly to plan. Number one. Number two, keep in mind, if you're 5 minutes into this video clip, if you were just watching on your own, and it's real easy to forget that it's totally forgiven in the contract if you simply follow the contract. Like they leave all of that out.
And I have never in my life, in my personal life or in my business life, and I'm old, had everything work the way it's supposed to. I can afford the payments, says the guy who didn't lose his job until the coronavirus shutdown hit. Mm-hmm. And now I can't afford that car anymore, which means that, by the way, you couldn't afford it to start with. And the same is true walking into this, and it's like, well, I mean, I could just put the money in the account, and I could turn around and pay it off, and how many times? Why? Listen, you need to sit down, leaders that are running churches, and you need to take a pay cut or a pay vacation. By the way, Congress, you ought to take a pay vacation and donate all that money to something.
So what we're going to see here in a moment is he just is walked through again, that the Ramseys wouldn't get paid. My leadership team wouldn't get paid. Some employees are okay with not get paid so that we don't have to have any layoffs. And then we would have to do layoffs before we would borrow debt. You see, this is where this idea of it being a principle would be, if you had a principle, a moral one, like I'm not going to cheat on my taxes. What you don't do is then give yourself 3 or 4 qualifiers. Well, after those things, I can cheat on my taxes. It's either a principle or it's not. And it sure seems like what he's doing is keeping his zealotry in place and getting to hold his moral ground. Meanwhile, maybe many regular employees have to endure undue suffering because he doesn't want to sign a contract that gives the ability to have money come into, not his organization, he make his own choice, but he's telling lots and lots and lots of people that grant him all the authority in the world that they shouldn't touch it based upon principle, that they should first do all these other things. And in this clip, he says, also sell your assets so that there's enough money to make it.
Cut your own pay, preserve cash, preserve cash, preserve cash, sell off assets, and protect your people. Protect your people. That's what you do.
Okay, so that's the last part of that super moral statement of protect your people, unless it requires you signing a contract that Dave Ramsey has a problem inside of his zealous philosophy with you signing. In which case, abandon all that morality, lay those people off because you didn't want to sign a contract that was going to have a loan entirely forgiven based upon choices that are 100% your control as the business owner to keep those employees employed for long enough to have the PPP loan totally forgiven. Okay. Now I'm going to share. I wanted to share more with you guys. I came loaded for bear today because I was going to show you how one of his people said, oh, this is, one of his followers was like, this is such a good idea. I'm not taking PPP either. All kinds of YouTubers were doing that. He cost his audience a truckload of money, a truckload. Let me give you a little taste of 2 more clips. All right. So in this next clip, Dave is going to talk a little bit about how it is that there's all this fraud and such a terrible idea, and this is 2 years in, and these aren't going to get forgiven, etc. And then we'll talk about where the real financial damage was done wasn't in the fraud, but was in his zealous advice to his listeners. Let's watch.
The easiest thing about doing this show is the answers are always the same.
That should give you an indicator. That's why he's able to do all of his stuff as a show. And he doesn't have to actually sit with somebody and ask them enough questions. It's because it's financial entertainment. He's just giving somebody the nugget. His answers are always the same. Like he's telling you he's a zealot without telling you he's a zealot.
You guys riding around in your car, you already know what I'm going to say. If you've listened to this show for 6 months, you know what I'm going to say when somebody calls in. And why are the answers always the same? Because they're not based on nuanced concepts. They're based on principles. And they came out with the PPP loans. You remember the PPP loans? We're going to give businesses these loans because we told these businesses that they had to shut down because the whole world is going to freaking die. And if you go to a restaurant, you're going to kill your mother. And so you must die at home. And we shut the whole economy down and everyone's at home sucking their thumb in abject fear and poverty sets in and the government comes riding in on a white horse and says, we're going to give you free money. Oh, wait, it's a loan, but it's not really a loan. It'll be a grant because we're going to forgive it as long as you maintain your payroll. I got death threats from some of you morons because I told no one to take out these PPP loans.
I just think it's important here for me to mention, I do not endorse, as much as I don't like some of this advice for Dave, threats are inappropriate. But maybe the reason people were angry is maybe they were some of those people whose businesses went under. All of their friends had their PPP loans forgiven, and those people's lives were completely and utterly destroyed by Dave's advice. That's kind of heavy. I still don't endorse, shouldn't threaten acts of violence, but there is zero compassion, despite him talking about compassion, zero compassion for the people that his advice may have destroyed. By the way, no apology for it. he just quit making any videos about it. This is the last one I could find that had PPP in it. Let's keep going.
Stay away from it. It's a trap. Don't step up on the door. They're going to pull the lever. You churches are absolute idiots for taking out a loan from the government as if they're not going to come in and interfere and tell you how to operate and violate your freedom of religion.
Which, by the way, freedom of religion was violated both in our country and others, but it was all specifically around COVID protocols and safety and masks and all of that, which you can agree or disagree with. But nobody's church was interfered with based upon them taking this SBA loan that had contractual provisions to forgive 100% of it as long as that money went to pay employees that you wanted to keep. Let's keep it going.
Because, it's not a loan, Dave. It's a grant. You're just so naive and you're such a fanatic and you never borrow money. And this is the worst times. These are unprecedented times.
Now, I'm going to keep in mind while he's doing all this play acting that this is about 2 years ago now. This is the very beginning of people asking for their PPP loans, and watch him spike the football in what he thinks is people not getting loans forgiven.
We have to pivot. Remember unprecedented and pivot? 2 words that we just wore the crap out in April? You remember these? I heard them over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm on here screaming, all the Ramsey personalities are on all of our media events screaming, do not take out the PPP loan.
Notice that every single one of his folks, every one of his platforms said, do not touch the PPP loan and loan forgiveness programs.
From Politico today. When the government pledged to give small business billions of dollars in rescue loans during the pandemic, it was all for almost too good to refuse. The loans should be forgiven if employers only maintain payroll. In little more than 4 months, the Paycheck Protection Plan, the PPP, doled out $525 billion to 5.2 million borrowers. Lenders that help the government deliver the money are warning that the effort is running into new delays. Well, there you go. Here's this one. Check this out. The banks say the processes for converting the government-backed loans into grants has been frustrating and has not happened at all. A lack of communication from the Small Business Administration. Now I'm shocked. And the Treasury Department. You mean government doesn't communicate? Which have run the effort since Congress created it in March. Banks which have loaned their own money with the expectation that it would be repaid by the government have been submitting applications for loan forgiveness to the SBA since August the 10th, but the lenders say the agency has been silent on whether any of the applications will be accepted. To date, the SBA said Thursday it has received 96,000 forgiveness applications, representing fewer than 2% of the total loans, but has not approved one.
He's about to spike the football here, and I want to I can't help it because he talks about being compassionate, but you'll see the lack of compassion that if these loans were not, by the way, spoiler alert, 92% of loans were forgiven. 92% were forgiven. And as a result of the 92% being forgiven, that was a truckload of wealth that was able to be retained by Dave Ramsey's very listeners.
Not one loan has been forgiven out of 96,000 applications, and that's only 2% of them.
Now, so this is the thing that we have to be aware of, is that while he was saying this, he was looking forward to telling everybody, see, listen, this is so terrible. Aren't you glad you didn't get into this? Because his audience, he mentioned earlier, he's gotten threats over it. Like his audience is watching people get their loans, people submit their loans for forgiveness. And yes, there's a delay with the SBA, but he's about to absolutely celebrate on all the people that would have been terribly hurt if the SBA didn't forgive the loans. Spoiler alert, they did.
No bank I know anywhere in the country has received any money from the SBA, said Brad Bolton, president and CEO of Community Spirit Bank in Alabama. The warnings from lenders are raising new doubts about the implementation of the small business rescue effort. Well, no crap, which was seen by many as a success, not by me. Its authority to issue new loans expired on August 8th. Thank you, Jesus. And
now, loans are going to start getting forgiven against what Dave said would happen And after it's proven that he's wrong, he's thankful nobody else can get into it. Just notice.
There is a broad bipartisan support to relaunch the program if lawmakers can strike a deal on economic relief. You've got to be kidding. You idiots are going to do it again. The confusion is creating potential headwinds for small businesses as they struggle to emerge from a recession, and their loans that were supposed to be forgiven have not been. Adding to the frustration is a growing list of unresolved questions from banks about how to handle the forgiveness applications. Banks say they've gotten conflicting information from various SBA officials. The SBA, people, if you don't know, is the DMV of the federal government for small business. Completely freaking incompetent. Cannot find their butt with both hands.
Incidentally, I'm not here to disagree or agree with him on the incompetence of federal employees, but we're looking in the rearview mirror now. 92% of those loans have been forgiven. There was some fraud, but here's where I want to leave you guys today. With 92% of loans forgiven that were submitted, now it's funny that it works out to be similar math. The fraud that people complained about was about 8%. But what I would offer is the real hurt wasn't the taxpayers hurt by the fraud that people did with PPP loans, which I think should be punished totally. But there's a real injury to that person that maybe has a business where they have $600,000 in revenue and $200,000 in employee overhead that the PPP loan would have let them survive, and they'll go right out of business, or did go right out of business, following Dave Ramsey's advice no matter what. Now, that's why on the show, we don't tell you guys you should follow our advice no matter what. You should always sit with an advisor or coach that knows your exact situation, or come meet with us. We'd love to meet with you and share with you what we do and how we feel like it's different. But the big things I want you guys to remember is, of course, like this video, share it with somebody else. I mean, how many people really take on a blow-by-blow analysis of a commentator as popular as Dave Ramsey? I don't know if this is going to get our channel in trouble. That's why I'm trying to do my best to honor him as somebody who's been very, very successful financially. But the fault being, this is a real situation where he gave advice to millions upon millions and millions and millions of listeners and told them not to do a thing that turned out to be a very, very good thing for many business owners, and for many of them, the lifeline that was required for them to survive. And those people are not in business anymore, and now need to go back to his plan of debt reduction and credit cards and living on a small income, etc. Because I mentioned at the beginning, his advice is really, really good for people that are broke. And in this case, some of his listeners are broke as it relates to the advice that he gave, which puts them right in the wheelhouse for the type of advice that he offers. With that, I hope that this episode has been something that allows you to observe the world differently. And from all of us here at Sound Financial Group, we hope this has been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life.